It hasn't even been a year since the Republican Party passed tax cuts for multinational corporations and the rich. But can you guess what House Republicans just did again? They passed another multi-trillion-dollar tax cut for multinational corporations and the rich. Not for you, for the wealthy. They're so shameless that they don't even hide it anymore. Just out in the open, they're showing their disregard for the poor and worship for the rich. And they don't care that it makes them look horrible. They don't care that clearly they're sending a huge message to the working class. They're doing this anyway. So let's get to the story, and I'm going to tell you why I think they're doing this, even if it has no chance of passing in the Senate. So as Glenn Fleischman of Fortune explains, with attention fixed on the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a new $3.1 trillion tax cut on Friday. The vote was 220 to 191, including 3 Democrats. The down-to-the-wire 2017 Tax Act passed in late December contained a mix of permanent and temporary changes that had to result in a net increased cost that fell within a structural limit of $1.5 trillion that allowed the Senate to approve the bill with a simple majority. The House's new bill takes effect starting in 2025 and would add $600 billion to the national debt within the next decade, and then $3.2 trillion in the 10 years after that, according to Howard Gleckman of the Tax Policy Center. Despite the House vote, it is unlikely the Senate will take up the legislation. The first round of tax cuts landed with a thud, with even a leaked Republican National Committee poll reported on by Bloomberg News showing American voters thought it benefited large corporations and rich Americans by an overall 2-to-1 margin, and the same margin among independent voters. So this is absolutely egregious, and I'm not worried that this is actually going to be codified into law, because I don't think this would pass the Senate, because Republicans know that the American people just aren't on their side when it comes to their tax bill. They're framing that this was a tax cut for the working class, by and large, has not been bought by Americans. They know the truth. They know that this is a large giveaway to the rich. And did they include some crumbs for the poor in there? Yes, they have the doubling of the standard deduction, but that's all temporary. What's permanent are tax cuts that benefit the wealthy. So here's why I think they're doing this. So we have the midterms quickly approaching, and this is them basically, in my opinion, sending a message to all of their donors saying, hey, if, these large multinational corporations, if you guys really liked the tax cuts that they gave you last year, well, if you help us get elected, there's a lot more where that came from. So this is kind of them fishing for more campaign contributions, perhaps seeing internal polling, realizing that they may be in trouble, seeing that, when you look at aggregate public opinion polls, just on a general ballot, Democrats are currently ahead, they might be in trouble. So in order to maintain control of the House, this is kind of them putting out that bat signal, or really the dollar signal, to their corporate donors saying, we're going to need help, we need a boost. But here's my question to Republicans. If you really want to get elected, why don't you try giving the American people a tax cut? And I mean giving them a real tax cut. Why do you always target your tax policy to benefit the very wealthy? When do we get a tax break? When do your constituents, the people who got you in office, not the dollar bills, but the people, the real people who voted, when do they get a tax break? Their answer would be, well, we just gave them one. Right, but that's temporary. When do the American people get a break? People are struggling. People are living paycheck to paycheck. People are struggling to pay the bills. And what are you doing for them? Absolutely not a goddamn thing. Republicans have been in power for 2 years now, and what have they done for the American people? Absolutely nothing. And that's despicable. And kind of getting back to, public opinion on this, I'm so glad that the American people did not buy into the Republican Party's framing about this being a middle-class tax cut, because that's just so obviously false. So I'm so glad that they didn't buy it. And what we saw, which really irritated me to no end, was a lot of corporations come out and basically do PR on behalf of Republicans. We saw companies like Home Depot say, oh, well, we're giving our workers a $1,000 bonus because of the tax cut that Republicans gave us. But let me ask you this. Do you think that their workers are going to get $1,000 bonuses again this year when nobody is paying attention, when Republicans are not desperately trying to convince us that their tax cut was for middle-class Americans? Of course not. And I would love to be proven wrong. I would love for companies like Home Depot and Walmart to give their employees bonuses. But mark my words, this year, I don't think we're going to be seeing very many headlines, if any, of these same companies who gave their employees bonuses last year again. And that's because they're no longer trying to do propaganda for the Republican Party. There's no longer this PR effort at the behest of Republicans who were rather trying to desperately prove to us that, this was a tax cut for working Americans. Now, of course, since this would cost trillions of dollars, I've got to ask the question that progressives are always asked: how are you going to pay for it? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pointed this out too on Twitter. She states, where are the pundits asking Republicans how they plan to slash Social Security and Medicare to, quote, pay for their next $4 trillion in tax cuts for the 1%? Or do we only worry about scarcity when it comes to funding chemo in college, but not private jets and sub-living wages? Exactly. So, Jake Tapper, again, this is a story that's your forte. Why haven't you talked about this? You claimed that you are genuine in your concern for fiscal responsibility and that you're going to hold both parties accountable. Well, for some reason, we only see you applying pressure to progressives when they talk about programs that would cost money that would help people. But when it comes to tax cuts for the rich or money for death and destruction, increasing the Pentagon budget, military spending, Jake Tapper doesn't care. He's silent. Doesn't say anything about this. So it's frustrating for two reasons. Not only because it's a double standard, but also because we're being bombarded with propaganda, and thankfully Republicans or voters are not buying it. But this is a message to not just Republican Party's donors. This is a message to you. Republicans don't care about you. They don't give a damn about you. They haven't done a single thing since they've been in power to help you. Republicans only care about the rich because, surprise, surprise, they're also very, very rich.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.